I'm Doug Collum. I'm the Vice Dean of Wharton San Francisco. It's great to see everybody here. Fortunately, the rain hasn't started yet. It's June 3rd, and we're still anticipating rain. But welcome to our 8th tutorial for the Wharton Entrepreneurs Workshop. You know, I feel like we're making progress. We kind of started out probably 4 or 5 months ago, maybe 6 months ago, with our first workshop, kind of not knowing where this was going to go. And I think, you know, now that we're eight sessions into it, it feels like this has legs to it. Just as a heads up to you, we have, as of, I think, 2 days ago, we have a dedicated microsite for Wharton San Francisco. It's wharton.upenn.edu/San Francisco, one word. And if you dial into that, all of these workshops within a couple weeks after their presentation get uploaded. So they're also on Wharton's YouTube page, but now that we have a dedicated website for our campus here, just as a note to you that you can find these workshops uploaded there. And we'll continue to provide more information to that website as we go. So just in the service of housekeeping, this is going to be our last workshop until September. We're going to shut down for July and August. I think we found that we don't get quite the same attendance in the summer months as we do during the normal school year. And so we're going to go quiet July and August and then come back in September. So this is an opportunity, now that we're 8 workshops into this is an opportunity for you guys to input. And I've heard different things about this. We are not going to recycle this. In other words, we're not going to go back and start over. We are going to continue the workshop, and we're going to continue to add, hopefully practical and useful sessions that are relevant for people who are working on venture-backed companies or contemplating their own startup company. And I've gotten various input so far. One is, hey, we need more entrepreneurs in the channel, on the panel. We need, you know, success stories. We need stories about failures, but more people who have actually been there and done that. I've also had comments about we need more focus on other sectors. We need focus on biotech. We should get into clean tech. I mean, so I'm factoring these in. I've had some comments we should do this more frequently. Our norm has been to do these workshops every 3 weeks on the premise that, you know, we don't want to wear out our welcome with you guys. On the other hand, you know, if we stage these things too far apart and you're actively engaged in a company, maybe it's not as useful. So our stab at this was to do it about every 3 weeks. One thing I have noted is that we do webcast these things. So there is some constituent of people who are coming in through the webcast. The problem with webcast is that it's not interactive. So for those of you who are here seated, it's no problem. You can raise your hand and we can have questions and so forth. But it's a limitation for people who are coming in by webcast. So Rai and I and other people in our IT department are going to start looking into ways that we can make it a little more interactive and therefore not quite as disadvantageous for those people who are coming in remotely. And then the last point from a scheduling standpoint is this is the first time that we've scheduled a workshop on a class day. So we have one of our classes in today. And the idea was when we have these workshops here in San Francisco as opposed down in Palo Alto, we want to facilitate the ability of those students who are piling in for classes today to show up a little bit early and to participate in these workshops. So that's kind of the, you know, my thought in terms of how we're going to continue running these going forward. But if you do have input or suggestions or topics that you'd like to have addressed over the course of the next cycle, you know, send me an email, let me know, and we'll factor that into you know, the series of workshops that we're currently planning. We don't have anything lined up currently. We have some ideas, but we're still going. All right, let me quickly turn to introduction. So we have Eric Hall and Chris Dier, who are with FLG Partners, which is they'll speak more to it, but it's a consortium of former CFOs, people with substantial experience as CFOs in both public and private companies. Chris I've known for some time. Chris was the CFO of the company that I was representing as a lawyer, and it was my first experience with an IPO. I think it was a good learning experience for both of us. That was Aurum Software back in, when was that? I'm sorry, we started this conversation. But it was 1996, yeah. So, and then Chris, jumped into another gig where I was working with him, and then he's gone on and has worked with some other, as CFO or consulting CFO with some other companies. He's got over 25 years of financial experience in doing this, and he has an MBA. And then Eric is here. We had a group of folks from FLG Partners here about a year ago, and there was a panel of about 4 or 5 people. And I kind of cherry-picked Eric out of the crowd along with Chris to have him come back and address us, just because I thought your experience was so relevant to what we're going to be talking about this morning. So Eric also has over 25 years of experience as a CFO in both public and private companies. So these guys are both well-versed in the area. Also has an MBA. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to these guys. As usual, we are going to come to a very hard stop at 9 o'clock so you guys can get out of here and get about your business. And at this point, I'd like to welcome you guys and thank you for coming.
Thanks for coming out this morning. I told my wife this is the first time I've been to a college course before 9 o'clock in 40 years, and she said, yeah, you were a lot younger then too. Okay. But she's great at putting the humility back into it. But that's why I chose economics, was economists don't like to get up before 10 o'clock. So it's quickly out of pre-med and into the business world. A little bit about FLG Partners is that we are the leading company for outsourcing CFOs in Northern California. And we also provide board advisory services as well, and advisory services to management as well. There's 20 of us. As Doug mentioned, that we've got a lot of experience in terms of our average is 35 years of postgraduate experience, over 20 years at the C level. We all have Big Four or investment banking backgrounds. We've done many deals from IPOs to fundings to raising bank financing, M&A transactions. So there's a lot of depth in the company. For the last 21 years, I've been doing the outsourced CFO, and I've been a single shingle. I've worked with companies, but the one thing that I love about FLG, and I've been here for 7 years, I was one of the first non-founder hires, is that I can pick up the phone or get online and send an email out, and I've got 19 answers back in less than an hour. If one of us doesn't know it, we can find somebody else within the group that can answer the question. And this is great for our clients because that 19 other partners of support cost the client nothing. So we really have banked on that over the years, and I think I've built the premier practice here and continuing to grow. And the last 2 years of the recession, we've added partners rather than contracted. So we're very fortunate in that, but as I like to say, we're either starting them up, cleaning them up, or shutting them down. So that's one thing about this business as an outsourced CFO, is that we always seem to find work no matter what the economy is doing. So turn it over to Chris to start off with the first few slides.
I think you might have seen my sector experience on the background here, but just in case you didn't, mostly software experience, storage management, data management, growth management software, CRM software before it was all Salesforce, which was Orem, and then most recently 4.5 years in clean tech space and photovoltaics. So feel free to pitch questions in those sector areas as we go along. These are the things we'll cover today, budgeting, reporting, and how to manage the board. Eric put the slide in. I'll just let you read that. It's comic about how people manipulate budgets, and hopefully that's not too much going on in your organization. I like this one because I think most of you, or at least I've had a good fortune of being in places where you have pretty good visionaries and people that know where they want to go. They have this vision, but the road, the path to that, the way you're going to traverse this mountain is usually unknown, and you're likely to make some wrong turns along the way. So just expect that, The issue is how to manage it, how to manage the cash impact of that, and avoid, a fatal consequence. It's easy to turn back, but you don't want to go over. So that's the point there. And I'll get into some techniques that I would recommend around that. Go ahead, Eric.
A little overview of the budgeting process here is that budgeting has really changed over the last few years, particularly with high tech taking off. I remember my early days at Amdahl, we'd start the budget process in July. We finish up in December, and then we'd keep revising it again and getting ready for the next budget round in July again. So you always had these long 5-year planning horizons, and it took you a long time to get the year done, but the reality is it has accelerated so fast in the last 20 years. You do a budget in the old-fashioned way, it's out of date. You look at it, I'm not going to read these, but the old way, management is driving it. They have their vision of what the company should be, what they should do. It's, let's sit in the smoky boardroom and figure this out, what the company is going to do. We're a lot more market-driven and event-driven now. How do you react when Apple comes out and announces iCloud next week? If you're Google, if you're Dell, if you're HP, how are you going to respond to that? I know Chris and I are old enough to have started out with the old 13-column spreadsheets. If you want 5 years, you just tape them together, and you've got a much larger spreadsheet. Or you put them in a nice little booklet. The old 13 by 20 computer printouts, so you used to have stacks that were thick. It's usually several volumes of it for the budget that you'd produce. You'd present it to the board and management, and nobody would read it for the rest of the year. How many of you remember VisiCalc or Lotus 123? Those are the early days of the PC, and it was a black box. We kept it in finance, we kept our arms around it, and we didn't share it with anybody. I started out using XM at Amdahl years ago, which is one of the base models that used in the Wharton econometrics model. So it was great to put on a resume until people, got into PCs and figured we don't use mainframes anymore. But those are the kinds of things that we'd do back then. Now it's Excel, it's distributed. I give my budget out to all my VPs and say, here's your department, tell me what you want to do. My role as a CFO is to figure out how to get them the financing to do it and keep them on track, but I want them to give me their input of how they see they should run the business. I'm a big believer in rolling forecasts. I like 13-month cash forecasts. I like rolling forecasts for the budget. Why take this long process? Every month we just redo it. If my fiscal year starts in January, if I've got a 13-month budget in December, I set the next 12 months, and that becomes my budget I measure against. So it's none of this, let's go off and go to the mountain and figure out what we're going to do for next year. It's always a constant process that every VP, every direct report to management is involved with every month and is accountable for the results and also their forecasts going forward. It's bottoms up. I like detail, not top down. Top down is fine for just saying, yeah, there's a business out there. You really have to do it from the bottoms up and determine exactly what the costs are going to be, what the revenues are going to be. And 5-year horizon is great, but I find the last 2 years it's really a crapshoot. I can be pretty accurate on costs in the first 3 years and slightly accurate on the revenues. But the other part is I like to see people with department ownership. I like to see accountability. It's not my numbers, it's your numbers. So that's the thing as the next slide I think shows. The cash is more important than your mother. My old boss at Amdahl, Ed Thompson, used to say that. That was his favorite saying. Tom Meredith at Dell, who used to work with us at Amdahl, took that on and wrote that to CFO of the Year a few years ago. But again, a 13-week rolling cash forecast to me is the best tool you can have in planning for a startup. It's all about cash burn and controlling cash burn.
Hey, Eric, just in the service of setting context here, and so you can calibrate on the audience, let me ask you guys a question. If there are 3 categories, if you're working or related with a company that is, I would say, pre-funded, number 1, has already received institutional funding, number 2, or your objectives are aspirational. Let me ask that now. So how many of you are aspirational in terms of working with a startup company, a venture-backed or professionally invested startup company? How many are aspirational? How many are engaged with the company, but it does not yet have institutional funding? And how many of you are working with a company that has institutional funding? Okay, so that will give you guys kind of a calibration on the mindset. So maybe as you guys go through, it'd be useful to I don't know how you do it, but go up and down the continuum to talk about, from a pre-funded company to a company that's got more maturity and has funding.
Well, the good thing is about, a lot of these tools we're talking about, the 13-week rolling cash forecast, whether it's a Fortune 500 company or a startup that's just got their seed money, it really doesn't change. It's a tool I've used for both. It's receipts and disbursements. It's not a sources and apps Gaap cash flow. You have to know when the timing of events are occurring. The Gaap cash flow doesn't give you that, so you need to go out there and see when things are flowing through.
If I could pop in, so a big part of this group is aspirational, right, or just pre-funded, and so I'm probably saying the obvious, but let me say it anyhow. Why is it so important? Why is cash more important to your mother? Think of the journey as sailing a ship from one island to another, and you're about ready to run out of provisions. Before you get to the next island, you want to make sure you get to the next island before you run out of provisions. So what's the consequence? Well, I can tell you just in the last 4 years here, I went through an experience where 4 years of blood, sweat, and tears was put in by the original team. They didn't get to a valuation point, an valuation step up or an inflection point. But the company will survive. It will survive, and it may actually be a winner in the end. But the guys that put the first 4-year effort, all their equity got crushed down, essentially wiped out. So, many of those players are still continuing forward, and they went through a technology transition that I think will be successful. But it's all, I'm sure you do these things because part of it you just want to do good and you want to have success, and you want to accomplish something. It's not all about money. But at the end of the day, you'd like to get rewarded. And consequence of running out of provisions before you get to the next island is wipeout time. and it's all about, the new money just says, too bad. It didn't count. If the old investors aren't willing to continue to pay up, they'll crush them down. And a lot of companies survive. I've been at several companies that survived, went on to be prosperous public companies, but the first round of guys got wiped out.
Thank God for industry ventures and second markets now. That definitely helps. But Chris is right. I've been in a few situations where we've gotten wiped out. But the one thing that's consistent here, earnings you can manipulate. Earnings are an accounting number. You can change that around, within the guidelines of Gaap, and show a lot of different numbers at the bottom line. The reality is cash doesn't lie. What's in the bank account is what's in the bank account. And as I said, on the second point here, armies run on food, companies run on cash. The companies, they go out of business because they can't pay their bills, not because they didn't have negative earnings. GE, General Motors, about 10 years ago, wrote off $2 billion on their pension funds, had a loss for the year. Still function, no problems at all. Had they written off everything and had $2 billion less in cash, they would have had a lot of different problems. So that's the thing to look at, is focus on the cash. If you know what the cash burn is, that will keep you going in a startup environment. So, how many people in here have been in startups before have seen the CEO or the CFO whip out their credit card to pay for payroll? Well, I've been the one who whipping out the credit card, so it definitely happens.
That's skin in the game.
Yeah, it's one of the things I try not to do as a CFO, but
yeah.
Looking at making payroll and keeping people there and keeping momentum going. It's also, if you're in negotiations on an M&A deal with back in the early days of the internet, dealing with AOL, they would literally come in, make you sign a non-shop agreement, and go in, do the due diligence, and know how much cash you had, and grind you all the way down until you aren't going to be able to make payroll, and then they lowball you with an offer. So as soon as we saw that happen the first time, any other deals I did with AOL, we were well prepared in advance before we went in. But the CFO's role in a startup is to make sure the cash is there. If you get 12 months worth of funding, make it last 18. Because you'll never hit the 12 months getting the next round of funding, because there's always something that comes up. The economy, delays in production, delays in getting your beta out, the chip blew up the first time you power it up. Those are the kinds of things that you never planned for on the development side, but you do need to plan for it on the finance side. So you got to make sure that cash lasts to the next valuation step, so you don't get washed out.
Okay.
This is
your spreadsheet.
Yeah, this is a good example here, and we've got this for you as a handout, actually the Excel model. This is a sample receipts and disbursements. So basically it's what I call it the gazins and gazouts. What's coming in, what's going out the door. The one thing I will say about this is you cannot do this sitting in your office. You got to get up out of your chair, go out and talk to your VPs, talk to your directors, talk to the people actually on the line and find out when are the sales actually coming in. You know, what are the things that we need to purchase, and get a feedback from them, because like I said, if you go with the budget will tell you generalities, but you need to find out what the specifics are, and the only way you can do that is the old management by walking around. Start talking to them and develop a relationship.
Can I ask a question? I mean, one of the things I've heard a lot is that a CFO is going to present data about the company's performance before the board, and it may be balance sheet data, it may be income statement data, or it may be, you know, equity incentive data in the stock plan and so forth. How do you guys, I mean, and every board seems to have a different objective or a different set of expectations in terms of what they want to see. I mean, how do you respond to what the board wants to see? Frequently, the first offering by a CFO of how the company, here's the dashboard of performance, and the board says, well, this is not what I want to see. I want to see something different. How do you do that?
Well, vet the dashboard for starters. Yeah, I mean, I frequently do that. I say, you know, here's a straw man dashboard. Go around and visit with them privately or, you know, as a group, better as a group, and, you know, ask them to what are the key indicators they'd like to see, and build a, you know, what I found with boards is most of them, you know, single pagers are enough. You know, boil it down to a few critical metrics that people can remember, comprehend, and easily digest. And if there's problems, then you can always do drill down analysis. So anyhow, I think my answer would be, you know, vet it. Also, don't, you know, generally they want to see a lot more than just financial metrics. You know, in the dashboard, it's, you know, it's development milestones. It's, you know, forward contracts that are lowering your price, your cost, or something like that. You know, whatever.
It's the infamous waterfall. We do waterfalls for sales, expenses, cash. But that's the one thing that VCs like to see a lot. So learn how to do a waterfall for just about any expense or revenue or balance sheet item that they want to see. But like Chris says, you vet it with your CEO. He or she will know the board the best if you're coming in as a consultant like we do. But they'll have a good idea what the board is expecting. What I found is that put the details in the back of the board book, and, you know, 1 or 2 summary pages of the key financial indicators like Chris said. But you don't need to go into a lot of detail, because the reality is that the board wants to spend time talking about the product or the technology, not about the numbers.
Yeah, they just want to know how long the cash is going to last, whether it'll get them past the milestones that change the value of the company. You know, so they're usually pretty simplistic about that.
Good anecdote of that one is I was the founding CFO at Yahoo. I was the part of the adult supervision Mike Mort stuck in there to get the company up and running, and Mike and I had a call scheduled every Friday at 10 a.m. and we'd go over the burn rate, we'd go over key buys, key contracts, things like that were coming up. But that was a Friday morning conversation that usually lasted about a half an hour. Board meetings, I just kind of sat in the back, took notes, and kept quiet, and let them talk about the technology and about the business itself. So it wasn't a lot of pressure, but Mike got his information that he wanted separate, and he got a very, you know, unclouded view of what was actually going on within the company as well too. So those are things you can also see as a CFO happening. Or if you're running a company, it's not a bad way to handle it with your investors as well. Because finance can be controversial. It can cause a lot of angst and agita that you don't want to have necessarily in a board meeting. So it may be better to take it offline outside of the meeting.
Okay. So I'll get into this one. By the way, feel free to interrupt. Vigorous interruption is better. And I told Doug that he collected 50 people or more that wanted to listen to CFOs. Was amazing. I thought 5 would be the limit. So then he said, well, I'm thinking about charging next time. I go, no, I don't want to find the market price for my presentation is 0. So
I think we can get our managing partner to pay though.
Yeah. So anyhow, I'm not going to go through all these. I'm sure all of you are, you know, mature, intelligent enough organizations to actually do bottoms up, you know, thinking. You set strategy, you set goal objectives, and you set milestones. So I'm pretty sure all of you, familiar with all that. I just as you become CFOs or CEOs of these companies, though, just go through them carefully and make sure you understand the linkage between all these things and where it might break, where it's going to unravel your whole timeline, because that affects your cash again. So, give you an example, maybe not too relevant, but clean tech company I was in, photovoltaic, everybody thought, well, you get the product done, you get it certified because of the certification process, you get some field data that says it's working as expected, boom, you're ready to go. Load the factory up, buy, forward 9 months worth of cells and stuff to go into this product, and you're off and running. And we sort of had this one line item that said, well, what do the banks think? Because solar projects are capital intense projects, and a bank actually has to finance the project. And banks are really risk averse, and they don't really care about new technology. They'd rather, finance mediocre old technology that they've lived with a long time than brand new technology. So there was this thing on our line item called bankability, get bankability approved. And that's kind of an amorphous thing. It's only real until a bank actually steps up and gives you money. So anyhow, just your role as the CFO is to help watch the CEO's back and to show where, if the linkage breaks down in this chain of events, what the cash consequence will be. And so it usually gets the CFO to think a little more conservatively about how their spend rate is going until they've got through what I call, you'll see a word here I call prove out. So find the things in your plan that you want proved out before you ramp up the next level of spending or increase your burn rate. And I'll give you a more relevant one probably to sell. So I ran into a mobile CEO the other day, and he said one of the metrics they were looking for is, we introduced this product and how many people subscribe or sign up for using our product online. It's free, right? And so they had a metric. If they hit that metric, they thought they were home free. They'd kind of garnered the audience that they were looking for. He said it was a false positive, though. What they found out is 2 months later, a lot of the people that signed up weren't using the product. So they built in that, they have to have a feedback system that, looks at the next level of metric to prove out whether they should ramp up. So I think that's your part of your counsel to your group is look at where those prove out milestones are and make sure they have agreement inside your organization what they are and whether you hit them before you ramp up your burn rate, because if you didn't hit them and then you ramped up your burn rate, you're going to run out of cash. I'm sorry, I'm jumping around, so let's go to the second bullet. So oftentimes what I do is I get the executive team to understand what they're doing is it's actually an experiment. So you remember that picture of the mountain earlier? And there's 10 ways to get up Mount Rainier, but some of them are false dead ends, right? And the only thing that's fatal is just not discovering it early enough, to turn back. So I'll give you an example. The VP of sales said, I got to have an inside marketing guy to go filter leads and then turn them over to my direct sales force and blah, 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 blah. And everybody goes, this is a sophisticated product. How in the hell is an inside sales force going to describe this on the phone and deal with it? And so we finally said, okay, we'll run the experiment. Hire 2 inside sales guys. Let them run with that for a while. What are the metrics we expect? If we hit the metrics, great, you proved your experiment was right. We'll add more. If you didn't hit the metrics, then we'll shut it down. We'll terminate, it's hard, but we'll terminate those 2 people because it was a failed experiment. So that kind of dialogue really helps the management team sort of avoid the huge ego and emotional challenges, Everybody goes, oh yeah, it's an experiment. We'll try to make it succeed. If it doesn't succeed, we'll know to turn it off. And so when you have to kill it, it doesn't become a big threat to somebody's ego or budget or what. It's just a more natural process. So I think I'll move on.
Chris, do you think companies spend far too much time looking internally though, and not enough externally at markets and other factors that may impact the company?
Yeah. Absolutely, great observation. Yeah. You really benchmark the world in the competition. I mean, so I wasn't going back to solar again. When I started in solar, Chinese had 10% of the market share. They now have 60% of the market share. How do they do it? Well, massive infusions of government capital to drive up the scale of their companies and drive down their costs. So every quarter I got the quarterly reports from the public companies, and they publish what their cost points are. And I go to our management team, I go, are we beating the Chinese or are we not? Because we aren't. If our new technology is not 10% less or 20% less, we might as well give up the game. So external benchmarking is, obviously your marketing department usually is doing that, but CFO can jump in that game too. So,
I mean, I'm seeming to be the one asking all the questions, but I'll just keep. So this is a little bit off task, but as a CFO, it seems like there's a fair degree of interface with like your R&D group and then your marketing group, and you've got to think strategically and you have to think operationally. It's almost like you're the implicit quarterback of the organization. I mean, I guess my question is, how much experience does a CFO have to bring to bear in order to be credible as a CFO? Because if in fact you're going to your marketing department and say, where's the market? Part of that is knowing how to ask the right questions and how to calibrate on how the organization is benchmarking against competition and against external factors in the market and so forth. It's kind of a loose question, but how does the CFO effectively function? You can't just sit there and be an ace on compiling financial statements. It seems like it's a much broader set of
yeah, I think so. I mean,
attributes.
one of my recommendations down in the package here is hire a strong controller. Go in there and get somebody that really knows accounting and how to compile books and financial reports and all that crap, because you're not going to be able to, it's valuable work and it's mandatory, but you can't function as a CFO if you're doing all that stuff, in my opinion. And so I spend most of my time walking the halls and actually going out to lunch with these guys who are spending time in their meetings, getting to really understand organically how the business works. Because, obviously the CEO is probably the best at that, but, they have a lot to do. They have business development, they have fundraising. And so you can become a backstop or an aid to them. And the most successful relationships I've had is where I sit down with the CEO and we go, well, here's the risk, and what the hell do we do if that goes wrong? And how does that change the timeline? So I think is that answering your question? Yeah. But hire a strong controller. That's my first.
I think in this day and age, as a CFO, you've got to understand all the facets of a company. You just can't be a numbers person. You just can't focus on the accounting. When you go out to talk to a bank or talk to a venture capitalist or private equity, you've got to be able to describe the business to them down to the detail, whether it's engineering or marketing or sales or the financial numbers. I had the great advantage of starting off in consulting at Arthur Andersen years ago and spent time when I was at Amdahl on strategic planning. So I got to see every facet of the company. There was an area, and also in Treasury, I had a treasurer that felt that if it cost money, we're getting involved. So we stuck our nose into things we probably shouldn't have. But at the end of the day, like I said earlier, if you don't design it, make it, or sell it, you better find a way to add value in finance, or you're not going to have a job. So the way I added value to the people I worked for and served was to figure out how to get them the money, how to get them the finance that they needed. A lot of companies focus just on the budget, just on the income and expense, but what they don't focus on is a step that, basically got me hired at Amdahl, was focusing on what's the financing plan, access to capital markets. There are a lot of different capital markets besides venture capital. Do you have a plan in place? Like, we're going to do venture capital for the first 2 or 3 rounds. We're going to take a look at maybe doing some more bank debt, or we're doing asset-based financing through something like Western Technology. Or we're going to go out and we're just going to look at private equity. But do you have a plan in place that can start getting you access into these? We had that at Amdahl. So we did a secondary offering. We did an increase on our revolving credit line. We did a private placement of debt. Because not all these credit markets are going to be closed at the same time. So I may not be able to do a IPO or a secondary offering, but I can go out and do debt financing, either with a bank or with the insurance companies. So it's getting access to these markets that a lot of CFOs forget about. And it's part of the plan that I don't see enough of in companies I go in. And the ones that we're doing turnarounds, is that they didn't think about alternative sources of capital. The VCs may be hot or cold. They may like your industry last year, this year they don't. You may have a great product, but damn, the market just disappeared, and so did your VCs. So what do you do then? So these are things that you really need to focus on as a CFO.
So everybody knows this axiom, under promise and over perform. You don't like to do that, right? So trouble is, if you under promise too much, then people go, well, this is not interesting business, sorry, go away, So how do you bridge that one? I think this has been fairly successful. Is we've always gone in with, plans that we can beat and then upside plans. And we actually present it that way to the board, and say, here's the plan that takes into account the set of risk and we think we can beat, and then here's an upside plan if things went well. Or the other way, here's the plan of record and here's what we're going to do if things unravel, if this timeline comes apart. So you're dealing with a range of expectations rather than one expectation. And so it actually gets people to think about what are those levers that cause you to go up or down, and gives you some flexibility to remind them at the next board meeting, by the way, we said bankability was a factor in the sales ramp. We're finding out that's a harder problem than we thought. Therefore, we're going to, have to operate on this downside plan. So that's just, strategies around that point. Financial reporting. Oh, I'll repeat that. Hire a strong controller. There's Gaap reporting, and there's management reporting. Gaap is necessary, and especially if you're raising bank debt or external debt, you have to be Gaap compliant. So I don't want to downplay that, but your probably more important role is management reporting. What's the management reporting's information system? So on the Gaap part, just make sure you understand that the world is going from starting to migrate from U.S. Gaap to international financial reporting standards. It's not mandatory yet, but I think Eric would say that in the next 2 or 3 years, the SEC is moving us that way.
Is that going to impact private companies as well? I mean, I know that's going to impact all public companies, but
Yeah.
is the expectation that IFRS as a convention will, by definition, is going to have to go down to the private company?
I probably phrase it a different way. How many of you out there are doing business with Chinese companies? Just a show of hands, or whether you're buying product from them or selling product to them. To me, this is we're at a time right now where it's back to when the U.S. took over from the U.K. From Britain as the leader in the world. China is going IFRS. They're going to be the 800-pound gorilla very soon too, probably in less than 10 years, is some of the estimates I've seen. My current client is a wealthy Chinese family that has a small $8 billion of assets, and this is pretty much privately held companies around the world, but seeing what they're doing and really taking capitalism to the next level, I think IFRS is going to be essential if you want to do business with them and you want to get acquired. We switched over to Gaap a year ago, and in the U.S. operations, the question I was asked by my Chinese counterparts in finance was, why didn't you use IFRS? And I said, well, it was recommended, but we didn't have anybody in the firm that knew IFRS except for me, and I'm the interim CFO. So I think it's something that's going to be more and more a factor, and I think private companies are going to have to adopt it as well too.
Yeah, so just think about it, if you have a choice, think about it. We have investments in European companies and our places I'm working at now, and they're all IFRS, and they expect the reporting. Good thing is about IFRS, it's actually more principle-based than rule-based, and it's actually a little more logical. You can fathom what the answer might be from the principles, whereas Gaap is a little more rule-based. Go ahead, yeah.
Can you just give a 20,000-foot overview of the difference between Gaap and
You knew that was coming.
Yeah, I know. It's like, Derek.
Well, I mean, I think it's principles versus rule-based. Revenue is a good example.
So the question, just so the people who are dialing in remotely know, the question is what's the difference between IFRS and GAAP?
Revenue is a good example. There's over 180 ways you can book revenue under GAAP. In IFRS, if I've got a contract in place, even if it's only a handshake, and I think it's a good deal, I can book it. Again, it's principles as opposed to rules. How you account for assets. It's lower cost or market or book value versus mark to market. IFRS, I can mark my assets to market. My client, we're an investment company. We've got real estate assets that I can't mark to market, where I'm sitting with about $400 million in gain, unrealized gain that I can't put on the balance sheet. Under IFRS, I could do that. Thank God for FAS 167. Hopefully next year I'll be able to do that in the US. But there's a lot of things that aren't recognized, which is why private equity does so well, because they can come in, purchase a company, take it private, and because they know what those values of the assets are. They do their own marketing and market themselves, but that's probably some of the biggest differences that I see. Depreciation, inventory costs. There is no...
Revenue's the big one, though. I mean, revenue is the big kahuna, and it's like a few years ago, if you had bundled elements, hardware, software, and service, and you couldn't, objectively value each component, it all got deferred until the last thing was delivered. And so some people argue that Apple was the force unwinding that, because they said, screw this. We sell phones, we sell apps, we sell, you don't have to bundle all these things together, and we'll recognize revenue at different stages. But I think IFRS was principle-based and said that's what you should do. You sold the phone, there's revenue. Now there's the support contract, there's revenue over time. So anyhow, I think just more principle-based. So that's good. That's the good news. Don't think you have to know it all. I think the key thing here I said is get to really know your accounting partner well. Fortunately, they've moved from a mode of being police to being coaches again. Sarbanes made them policemen. Now they're back to being coaches. Get them to intimately understand your business model, and then so they'll help you coach, what your options are, and make it, a collaborative effort in getting books done, as opposed to, telling you at the end of the year, oh, you did it wrong. So, the question in the back.
So I have the pleasure of being 75 days in a company that's victim of its own success. They grew really, really fast. That's a great thing, right? They're doing gangbusters. All the things you say are great, except our record keeping and our systems haven't kept up with the growth. We're now in 10 countries. I've got people in every country to follow up with the cash flow, to find out what our revenue is, and to actually take into account GAAP/IFRS. And yet you tell me to underpromise and overperform when I have entrepreneurs who are like, how come you don't know what's going on everywhere? And how come we can't get budget to actual on a daily basis? How would you recommend dealing with that, and the time that it takes to build the infrastructure to catch up with business? Can you do it without infrastructure?
No.
Is there a secret?
No. No. You'll have to invest in infrastructure. So
the question is in the context of a rapidly growing company which is hitting successes on the international front. How, if you're switching from GAAP to IFRS to anticipate where the world is going, how do you keep up the record keeping with the actual operational growth of the company?
Chris, do you ever have that dream or nightmare that you want to get called into a company before there's a problem?
Yeah, clean slate, build it. It's, unfortunately, in most growth and early stage companies, finance is the tail of the dog, and so you're usually last in catching up. So you'll have to brute force it with some manual staff for a while you envision what the next step up is in your systems. What I counsel you is, when you look at systems, see if there's mid-tier systems. You're buying into Oracle or SAP. You're buying into a nightmare. So they're mid-tier systems, and then get your organization to work with the prepackaged stuff. Customization slows you down, screws you up. You can always take prepackaged answers and then, off spreadsheet offline, a little more analysis. Staffing's critical. Key players, lieutenants that you can trust and put into work. Keep reminding yourself and the board and the management team it's key metrics of growth and revenue and cash that are most important. We'll catch up with the details. I'm sure that's not giving you a lot of comfort, but that's. Yeah. Okay. yeah. I'll send you a bill for zero. So anyhow, it's a high-class problem.
I've got to ask another question. So, acknowledging that a lot of people here in the room are in aspirational mode or working with companies that are pre-funded, when do you bring a CFO into the organization? I mean, guys at your level are not without substantial cost. And so if you're going to offer a counsel to a company that's on a growth ramp that's starting at the beginning, how do you manage your financial organization? What's the process? How should people think about a CFO, bookkeepers, temporary CFOs, and so forth?
Well, I think for my role, having been doing this for 21 years now, is that what you pay for me, I always feel I can deliver twice as much value in terms of what you're paying. And that's how we really exist as FLG, is that we have to add value. We just can't be that pull you pour money down. So, we can do a lot more in 2 days than a lot of people can do in 5 days because we've been doing it for so long. We've got the routine down. As far as what stage you bring it in, there's a big debate on that now. Look at Andreessen Horowitz. What they're doing is now they're building their own staff. They've got marketing people, finance people, sales people, engineers that they can have in-house on staff and then put those out into their companies. You've got Vinod Khosla and Mike Moritz, Vinod at his own firm and Mike Moritz at Sequoia, are basically saying, we don't need a CFO for the first couple of rounds. We're going to put all of our money into product, we're going to put it into people, we're going to put it into markets, but we're not going to put it into infrastructure. If we've got proof of concept, if we've got proof of markets, or we've got the right technology, then we'll start building the infrastructure. Because let's face it, the first audit's a throwaway. So why do we need to even pay for that in the first or second round? So you're seeing a lot less of that now in term sheets where you need to have audited financials. The reality is VCs focus on the cash. To have that opinion from an auditor at an early stage doesn't really matter. So you're seeing that end, but you're seeing others like the NEAs of the world are still focusing on the old standard, which was let's put some good people in there from the start. So it's varying all over the board now and seeing much more diversity.
Yeah, I actually agree with the bias that we don't need a full-time CFO in the first 2 rounds.
So what do you do in the meantime? I mean, you go out and buy an off-the-shelf bookkeeping software? And
Yeah, you can get lightweight software packages. It's amazing how far QuickBooks and some of these little things, Intact or something like that, will get. You can even outsource your HR. That's a little, that sometimes works. You can get a collection of single consultants in legal, and supplement your main law firm doing the corporate finance work to do maybe contracts, things like that. Hire a part-time CFO. That's what I do. Is I sell myself as the guy that goes in and helps build the business model and the strategy and the stress test of the cash. That could be a project. I do it. I talked to a guy yesterday. He wants me to come in and do that for him. Then what will I do after that? Well, we'll wait till gets a little closer to the revenue stage, and then we'll start developing the systems and accounting policies, and I'll help him collect the resources he needs. So I'm actually more of an ombudsman for resources, if you will, or a networker. So that model works, where you're in there for a project or 1 day a week until it gets to a phase, and so what do you have to bring into that is ability to be a strategic sounding board, benchmark it by data, how to build an organization in the right times, and domains. Usually, some domain knowledge about the sector is helpful.
I agree. For early stage companies, you really don't need a CFO there full time. I turned a 3-month assignment into a 3-year assignment, just being there 2 days a week, because I got everything done that the CEO needed, that the board needed, so they didn't need to hire somebody full-time, so they saved money on that they could put in somewhere else in the company. So that's one of the things that for Chris and myself and our other 18 partners that have done this, we've got a lot of experience. So that's when if you're looking to be an interim CFO, we're looking at hiring interim CFOs. There's a lot of good firms out there besides us that know how to do this too. And that's the thing is that, again, it's really putting the money into the people and products and technology is where you need to make your spend. On the infrastructure, Peachtree, you can move that up to any of the Sage products, whether it's in Sage or Mass 500. QuickBooks can be ported over to any accounting system. There are so many people out there that know how to do the data porting. You can't go wrong with that either. To answer your question in the back, I mean, choose a system you can grow with. There are some great systems out there like Microsoft NAV, which is the old Division product, which can be used. You can run a large Fortune 500 company on that software. So there's a lot of things out there you can look at.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can really, I mean, I'm probably going to get flack from the back there, but
I'm smiling because we're implementing Gaap this week.
yeah, you can get flack from the back, but I mean, I'll give you a contrast. So I was in the solar business, obviously, like I said that earlier. And so do you go out and buy an MRP package, or do you just do it on Excel, right? One of our competitors, or somebody in the space, went out and paid $5 million, essentially for a big Oracle ERP implementation. I said, well, there's only 18 items in the bill of material, and they can't change a lot because you got to get certified before you can change it. It's like, why can't we do this in an Excel spreadsheet? So we made an Excel spreadsheet. Our MEP department was a financial analyst with a spreadsheet. So, I don't know. Maybe we'll get blown away in the growth phase, but just don't get, it's just a lot of people, and especially executives that come out of successful big companies, they know they want to go for the brand name, nameplate stuff, and you really got to talk them down from the tower, for that early stage. So, another question over here.
I run a very, very small startup with 2 people, but we're already bringing in revenue. Are there things that I can do now, pre-needing to bring in a CFO, that would make your job easier when you arrive?
So the question is, in a seed stage company with a very limited number of employees, what should a company do in that context in terms of managing the financial area?
You can bring somebody like us in as an advisor, where we can spend maybe a couple hours a week with you. Like Chris said, I agree, hire a great controller. You can hire controllers on a part-time basis as well too. I've got one person I like to use. If anybody who's a classically trained musician, they make the best accountants. They have an attention to detail. You cannot play Mozart or Beethoven without knowing the detail. And same thing translates over to accounting. But the one person I use, she is a classically trained musician, and she is great. I can put her in, and she can get done in a day what takes others 2 or 3 days to do. Yeah. And it's all accurate. So find somebody like that you can put in there that can do your bookkeeping for you.
Yeah, where you get hosed is things like option accounting, cap sheet,
valuations.
There's all kinds of myriads of reportings now for options and things, and so hire a controller or a senior accounting manager and somebody that had startup experience, because they know what that laundry list of stuff is you have to do that will really bite. So when you go to finance and you go to the lawyers and you go, oh, and they look at your cap sheet and their option table and all this stuff you haven't done, and they go, holy shit. And you spend thousands and tens of thousands of dollars and hours trying to reinvent this thing while you're trying to close a financing. So there are hygiene things that if you just ignore them will be pretty painful and expensive, the next financing. And you can get help to do that. It doesn't have to be full-time by any means. Yeah.
When you talk about your relationship with the controller, I was just wondering, in terms of skills that make a successful CFO, how important is a deep understanding of accounting, like a CPA level versus sort of the MBA overall understanding? I mean, obviously the more knowledge the better, but but is it really necessary to have kind of the deep accounting?
So the question is, for a CFO, how important is it to actually have CPA level knowledge as opposed to just good sound business knowledge?
I'll make a self-serving comment. I'm an MBA. I
Same-
get by.
here.
I must say the world, though, is getting a little more technical. So how do you cover that risk? How do I cover that? I spend a lot of time with the auditors and I say, here's all the transactions going on in the business and how it's evolving and blah, 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 blah. And, they'll say, have you thought about this? You thought about that? And, I have a conceptual, understanding of what they're talking about, and then we drill down as necessary and make sure that I understand deeply enough to avoid pitfalls. So I don't, you don't have to be a CPA, except if you're running limited partnerships and,
It
very
helps.
balance sheet intensive things you got to watch out. It's a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, it's a great question because it's one I run into all the time. My current client said we're wealth management. I don't have a CPA, but I'm the lone person who found the errors.
Crap, I thought you did when I asked for
Oh, no.
advice.
A CFA. But I'm the non-CPA is the one who found the errors in the footnotes on our annual report for my client. So you have to have an understanding of it. You got to know it. Even though you're not a CPA, you still have to be able to dive deep into it. I've got to be able to recite FAS 157, not ASC 840 on valuations, backwards and forwards. I have to know what the rules are, even though I may not be a CPA. So we spend a lot of time in the firm reading up on all the technical pronouncement that comes out from AICPA, SEC, FASB, you name it, because it does impact us.
I'm going back to my two-person company over here. Make sure you have somebody who really knows options and option valuation. I mean, you can get into tax traps, you can get in reporting traps, you can get into, and then you're messing with people's motivations because it's screwed up, and you're trying to redo that. It's ugly. You don't want to do that.
And expensive.
And expensive. Yeah. Yes.
Oftentimes you need local talent on the ground in China. You mentioned some startups that has dispersed operations. And do you guys have services that help manage the finances of the WOFE or the subsidy overseas?
The question is whether
Yeah.
the speakers have expertise in overseas operations.
Right, because even startups now have geographically dispersed.
Yeah, you're very likely to be dispersed quickly. It's an interesting challenge. I mean, there's companies that specialize in this, like High Street Partners. I think High Street
Is
is
one.
when you call them, and they're sort of a global, how do I get your subsidiary started company and managed. So you can contact them. Oftentimes your law firm will have a correspondent office in the country, and they'll recommend, they have startups, and you kind of get referrals to, appropriate stage accounting firms. Done that in India. A lot of people end up with operations in India. Chartered accountants are actually incorporate companies and do a lot of broader work, legal work than accounting. So, sorry, in China I don't have a real specific answer for you. You might try High Street Partners. Yeah.
Your accounting firms too, the big four, even the second tier firms all have offices in China now, so you can go to them and
Correct.
they can find somebody for you locally that's there. I have a disadvantage, and as Chris does, we don't speak Mandarin or Cantonese, so having somebody on the ground that can speak that is very important. Because you just lose a lot in translation. But again, all of us have international experience ourselves, though. Working with 19 subsidiaries at Amdahl that were overseas, you get a lot of experience in that, and it's becoming more and more a part of my everyday practice. Because the U.S. isn't the market it used to be. The rest of the world is catching up, so there's a lot of opportunities if you're a startup, where you don't have to focus on selling in the U.S. One of our partners, Mary Korn, her client is a South African company. That presents its own set of problems because guess where South Africa can do business in? Cuba and Iran. They set up a U.S. headquarters. That creates a whole new batch of problems that they have to deal with. So those are things that we've developed over the years in our prior jobs, prior lives, but it is becoming more and more important. But you can find that with a lot of firms besides us, your accounting firms, law firms, like Chris said.
Yes.
How important is it to find a CFO who has experience raising money?
Question is how important a CFO is in raising money.
To find one.
To find a CFO who has that capability.
A lot less today than it was, in the 90s. I did a lot of fundraising in the 90s. The problem I always had is being a consultant. I always got asked, "Are you going to stick around when we put the money in?" I said, "No, I've already got a job. I'm a consultant." Nowadays, we do the preparation, but it's really the CEO that they want to hear from, as opposed to the CFO.
Yeah, it's a little more it's stage dependent too. If it's very early stage, I mean, the first A through C, very CEO driven, they're buying that guy, that person. Sorry, and the team, of course. But that person is they have to believe in that person. That person is the asset. They're investing in the technology, of course. As you get later stage, though, where CFOs become even more effective is raising debt. So if you think your business is eligible for debt, a mix of equity and debt. I've raised debt independently in my own, and sort of bring the CEO in the show and tell day. Here's why we can pay back your loan, because we have this cash flow. And by the way, his CEO is a good guy. Or prepping for an IPO. You can help go out and meet the analyst community, sort of get them familiar with your story, and your model, and so then when they meet the management, they're up the learning curve, and you become a useful feeder of information to them, and working with the bankers. So I think it's a little more stage dependent and more effective in equity, debt, and later stage. And obviously, if you're going public, then
What about like for clean tech companies? Is it more essential to have somebody, a CFO, who's got experience in dealing with government or?
I'll tell you, a huge component of finance in the clean tech area is government R&D grants, government loans, support loans. I mean, you'll cover every base of finance that you can imagine. Yeah, so if you have it, a lot of us had to go through the learning curve. It's a newly developed sector. If you have experience, it's definitely a benefit. Because maneuvering all those things are time consuming, and you can relieve the other staff of a lot of that work if you're knowledgeable.
A company that primarily has monthly receipts and disbursements. Can you talk a little bit about the value of doing a weekly rolling forecast?
So the question is that for an early stage company with monthly receipts and disbursements, how important is it to have a forecast? Chris? Yeah.
Yes. And it's a company that's not in the high-tech space, so it's not going to be getting any type of funding.
So you basically cut checks once a month for your employees and vendors, and get your cash receipts in once a month, or?
Yes.
Probably not as important. It's something where I haven't seen that very often. That seems to be the exception as opposed to the rule. But you've got cash flows coming in and out usually daily. The larger a company gets, so it's how do you handle when you get the the payment coming in on a large shipment, or you have expenses going out, expenses to your employees.
Depends on your business. I mean, if it's highly lumpy, receipts, and you have a thin reserve, you have to, right? Otherwise, you'll find out you can't make payroll some week. Yeah, thin reserve. Yeah. You'll find out you can't make payroll some week, and you'll be pulling out the credit card. So. And it's also, Eric, I think I can put it in the slide, it's kind of useful discipline. You sort of, you really get grounded. This is wow. When I sign that PO, it's money going out the door, and it's going to go out this period. And does that match when I'm going to get money back in the door? So as a small company entrepreneur, it's actually, not a bad thing to look at. And then you're not looking at Gaap. You don't really, you're not necessarily focused on profitability, but just making sure you don't have any, ugly surprises like you can't make payroll.
Looking at a similar question from the reverse perspective, later stage companies that are preparing for an IPO. how far in advance of the IPO should a full-time CFO be on board to be prepping the analyst community and so on? And what are the other major things that that CFO at that time really has to be working on to make sure that the IPO itself goes smoothly?
So the question, just for the remote audience, is for a company that's mezzanine level looking toward an IPO, how far in advance do you have to bring on a CFO, and what are the essential attributes that you're looking for in that person?
Okay, you want me to start?
Yep.
Give it a start. Yeah, I've done it as little as, dropped in as little as 8 weeks before. Don't do that. Don't do it. Now, I really think of like a year. So what does a CFO have to know to be effective and help raise value? First of all, he has to know the business model really well, the domain knowledge. It takes time to obviously build that up. He wants to help the management team make sure you have what you need most after you're public is predictability. You know? And so it's the sanity test that, you know, is this really repeatable, predictable, or what level is it repeatable and predictable? So getting dialed into that. Probably the analysts, you know, are the most valuable team on the investment banking side will be the analyst, not the investment banker. Investment bankers, you know, goes on the roadshow and that's it. It's the analyst that sells the institutional investors on your company, and it's the analyst that keeps the market growing after you've gone public. So analysts are better if they have had a year to look at you and kind of get familiar with the beast and grow to like it or not, and then you have to pick the analyst that's enthusiastic. That's the number one selection criteria. I don't care if it's Goldman Sachs or whatever. Pick the analyst that really loves you because they will sell they're the ones that call in Fidelity, you know, and Janus Fund or whoever is going to buy your stock, and they're the one that's really making the pitch for your company. So you want an analyst really on your side, and that takes time to cultivate. And then just predictability. I mean, you don't want to go out and have a surprise, you know, shortly after you're public, because then when you lose an audience, they may not come back. That's it.
Yeah, with IPO, getting ready for an IPO, you want to have an audit in place. So, you know, how soon do you have to have that audit? You know, you're going to be spending at least 2 or 3 months going through, if it's your initial audit or even second audit, going through and getting things ready for the field work and get everything done. So, you know, at least factor that in. One of our portfolio companies that my client went public earlier this year. They were actually prepping last year, and they literally ran up to, they got the audit done and then filed their S1. So that's cutting it a little close, but you figure probably 6 months, 3 to 6 months would be enough lead time, I think, to get everything done for an IPO. M&A is a lot different. I've been parachuted in a week before we had to make a presentation and pulled it off. So it's a whole different beast in that regard.
Just as an add to that question, what about compliance with Sarbanes-Oxley and Section 404? Is that a factor in terms of leading into an IPO? From it's the standpoint of when do you bring a CFO on board?
Should we give him the honest answer or the politically correct one?
Yeah.
I'm seeing less on Sarbanes-Oxley and 404 these days in audits, particularly for early stage companies. You get the questionnaire, but the reality is that for a small company,
You have X months to comply, right?
Yeah.
It's, how many is it now?
yeah, it's
Yeah, it depends. Yeah. So you have, you know, post IPO compliance. The key, though, is still getting back to what I said earlier, is understanding the business model and the repeatability of the process. Because if that breaks down, then, you know, Sarbanes won't fix it. Nothing will fix it, you know. So. And they actually go hand in hand. I mean, if you really have know the business model and how it repeats, then you're more likely to be able to successfully comply because you have the fundamental control, mental control.
Yeah, I think having good processes, procedures, and controls in place, regardless of what size company you are, is the best thing to do.
Yeah.
But you go through an audit, you know, Deloitte will give you their 75-page questionnaire that you have to fill out, and a lot of the controls that you have to have. If you're a large company, you don't have in a small company. You just don't have the people to do it. You know, I don't have enough people to put in the layers that I need for all the controls because we can't hire a 50-person finance staff. We don't have those people on board to do it. So I think it's less of an issue, but as your company grows, yes, it becomes more important. But you can always build that in.
We've got 5 minutes, fire questions at us.
We probably have time
I
for
wanna
two or
flip
three more
to-
questions.
To the slide 12, the summary page.
Oop.
So- I think the fourth point there, I really want to emphasize is that you need to spend a lot of time on the revenue side. Expenses are the easiest part of finance for Chris and I to do, because we can get expenses down to probably a 1% variance over actual.
Yeah.
The revenue side, it's all over the map in companies that we see. So really spending a lot of time with the marketing and sales folks. Anybody who's out there who's in marketing and sales, learn finance too, because if you can speak the language, you'll be a lot more efficient. And having friends who have been CPAs or CFOs and gone over to the marketing side, or the dark side, as we like to call it for those that are stuck in finance, it really is important to be able to spend the time, understanding what the business model is, how you're going to make money, how you can change it, pricing, distribution, whatever it is.
Yeah, you guys might remember the author, I forget his name, but the one that wrote Crossing the Chasm. Thomas, yeah. Yeah, that's probably the number one issue you always, because as new technologies can always find early adopters. People really like to try things that are new and will take a risk, but turning that into sustainable revenue, growing revenue stream it can be a while crossing that chasm. And that's typically the most frequent problem we face is people underestimate the time, effort, and money to do that, and fall into a cash hole during that crossing.
I think flexibility too. You got to be flexible. You got to be able to turn on a dime, because if your competition changes, the market changes. One of my clients, great product, the market vaporized. They're going after supermarkets, and the supermarkets quit capital spending at the start of the recession. There went their business.
Yeah, I also recommend rebudgeting every 6 months. 12 months is far too long a time in a startup company. Do an annual plan and then say, just tell the board we're in the middle of the year, we're doing an update. Hopefully there's no change, but chances are there are.
It's an article we included in the package on flexible budgeting that was in CFO magazine. I encourage you all to read it, because it's a great view of how the world is changing, even at the Fortune 500 companies. A lot of Fortune 500 companies are getting rid of the annual process, and it's just a continuous process.
Yeah.
Update it monthly or quarterly. Do 13 months. Like I said, December, fix it for the next 12 months.
Yeah, and bear in mind that fundraising is also longer time-consuming process than you expect. It's, even if you're doing well, but if you're in the middle, sort of in the gray, if some things are indicators of good, others aren't, it can take many months from start to finish. So build that into your cash flow.
Time for one or two questions.
Hi, my name is Sherry. I actually just graduated, or I finished my undergraduate business degree at Berkeley. So what I'm wondering is, I can tell that the role of CFO has changed a lot in the past few years. How do you see it continuing to evolve, maybe in the next 10 to 20 years for potential CFOs in the future?
Question is, how is the role of the CFO changing, or will continue to change over the next period of time going forward?
Yeah, I think Eric hit on a big one, multinational. You're very likely to be very multinational early, maybe even possibly even more of your business outside the U.S. So that's one to consider depending on your sector. Strategy is, staying up in strategy and industry domain experience and benchmarks is really important. And then surround yourself with the right technical experts in law, accounting, to make sure you don't trip over landmines, which are many. So I hope that helps, but yeah.
So why don't we bring this to a close? It's 9 o'clock. Please, let's say thanks to our speakers today.